As you know, this is the next to the last meeting of our seminar on feeling and imagination in art, science, and technology. Since the first two that were filmed, we've dealt with different chapters of my book, Feeling and Imagination. We've dealt with the entirety of Marvin Minsky's book, The Emotion Machine, and we've dealt in discussions, all of which were run by you in relation to, and as well as me, on various subjects about the nature of creativity and the way in which imagination, feeling interact with rationality. Today we're going to have a presentation of the final paper, the major paper that Elsa Castilla, here on my left, is going to submit next week as the final evidence of the work she's done in the course. Before she starts, there are a couple of things that have been developing in me that I haven't really dealt with adequately, but perhaps because of the course and because this is related to my own work in progress, I suddenly get glimmers of what needs to be done. So I'll talk briefly about those glimmers now, and next week, when we'll have discussion about your papers and everything in general, we can come back if you think that what I'm offering today is worthy of consideration. One of the main problems that we keep confronting is the relationship between the brain and what's sometimes called the mind, or the brain as a bodily instrument, and experience as something that isn't obviously reducible to the work of the brain. Now, we've talked about different theories about this, some of which say that experience is simply the brain in operation, and that all the problems about human experience can be solved by further, more advanced analysis of understanding of the work of the brain. I, at least, have not been comfortable with that. We've talked about this from various points of view and in relation to the writings of various people. In the case of Minsky, I'm still not clear about how he thinks mind and experience, brain and experience are related. But that's obviously one of the major topics that his book deals with. Now, the idea that I want to throw out now, which I haven't seen written up very much, but it's such a simple, perhaps obvious idea, it may not at all be novel to me. I mean, novel to me, but maybe not to anybody else, is that possibly the mistake that's been made in cognitive studies has been to think that everything in experience depends on the brain, and therefore understanding the nature of the brain better will inevitably tell us what we need to know about the nature of human experience. The idea that I want to throw out is that, yes, it's true that without the brain we couldn't have experience, and yes, it's true that changes in the brain alter our experience. One obvious example is what's called seeing stars. If you hit someone on the head, you affect something in the mechanism of the brain that eventuates in these flashes of light, which are metaphorically called stars, and that's seeing stars, right? Over and above this, however, the big crucial question is, should we think of the brain as a established, so to speak, fixed, constant, almost autonomous entity, the changes in which will change experience, an entity of the sort in that the legs are. I mean, if the legs are operating well, they'll enable people to engage in locomotion and to experience walking. But it's possible that we're sort of mistaken by our model, and that while changes in the brain affect experience and create changes in experience, possibly changes in experience affect and literally change the brain, so that the two are in some kind of interaction, and when they work harmoniously, all's well with the creature, the human being who has it. But perhaps it's a mistake to think that the brain is of a uniform structure rather than an adaptive one, so that the chemical and synaptic and other operations of the brain are actually changed, that they evolve in accordance with human experience. Now, I'm not prepared to say that they evolve in accordance with the history of the race, so to speak, so that if you study Western history, you should be able to predict changes that are going to take place in the brains of people at the end of that history as compared to people at the beginning of the history. You know, that gets to be a large-scale question about the nature of evolution. But within an individual, at least, the individual comes into the world with equipment for sensory experience, and then eventually more mental, more higher-level experiences. And it also has the brain that's suitable for that. What we find, however, is that different individuals have different kinds of experiences. No two babies are identical in terms of the dates or the way in which they respond to the sensory input that they receive as babies. In that process, what I'm hypothesizing, and that I think some research by some of you could be very helpful, possibly the brain has been changing, not only the way in which brains change uniformly for individual development, so that obviously the brain of an adult changes greatly from the brain of an infant, and there may be a definite similarity of some sort between different individuals who are adults in relation to what they were like as children. So you might find that isomorphism, regardless of who the individual is, right? Or within reason, probabilistic reason. But also that the actual change in any one individual, the detailed change in one individual's brain, experience, will itself create changes in the brain of that individual. That would be a way in which experience would affect the brain as well as being affected by the brain. Now, if that makes any sense to you, how would you go about verifying it? You would have to know something about the inputs, which are sensory, basically. In other words, something outside the brain which does affect human experience, and if the theory is plausible, thereby affects the brain in different ways because the outside inputs vary fairly considerably. But how would you go about verifying this concept of interaction as a way of showing the relationship between the brain and the mind? And second, how would that conclusion, whatever it is, affect the way in which we think about computers in relationship to human beings. Computers are made of material that doesn't seem to respond as fluidly or as plastically to things that might be happening in experience, because those elements are electrodes and bits of machinery, of hardware, and even the software might be such that it's not liable to any great alteration from one moment to another. It's been put in the computer in the hope that the computer will successfully use the software in an identical way, whatever is happening to the person who's using the computer. Right? We couldn't use the computers as they now exist unless they were constant in that way. So it doesn't matter whether when I open my computer I'm in a grumpy mood or a cheerful mood, whether I've had a good breakfast or a bad breakfast, whether I'm feeling pain or pleasure. The computer is going to do its job in a uniform way because it's been programmed to do so through the software, and that in turn is determined by the nature of the physical entity for which the computers are and which we are not, at least not apparently. I mean, in an obvious sense, we're not. If the thesis that I'm throwing out to you about the interaction between experience and the brain is tenable, would that indicate that machines can never be made to duplicate human experience? Or would it be a clue to how the new computers have to be constructed, a clue that would be very relevant to the research that I mentioned earlier several times, that people like Rosalind Picard in the Media Lab are doing, that is trying to create computers that are more responsive to human experience and possibly approximate some of the non-cognitive, that is affective, elements of human experience. I just throw that out as a question. Maybe the original thesis is untenable, and maybe even if it is tenable, it doesn't help very much to explain how to make these new computers of the future. Now, I want to stop now because I do want to hear what Elsa is going to say. But if you can mull over this, we can spend as much time as you want on these questions next time. All right? Anybody want to make a quick comment? All right, let me hold up the proceedings by giving Joe, who just came in.
I had a thesis meeting.
You already have that?
No, I was just saying I'm sorry I'm late. I had a thesis meeting, so.
I'm not complaining. Do you haven't made out that? No, I was saying he just came in for the sake of the camera. Your update, you put Prof. Irving Singer?
Yeah, I'm just copying what.
Oh, that's right. Copy out what he was doing. And hand in your paper next week if you're really pleased with it. If, however, you want a couple of days extension, I'll give it to you in advance, but the grades are due 2 weeks from today, the week after next meeting, so it can't be for very long. But we'll decide when you'll add it in next week. If you finished it and don't want to do any more, that's fine.
I'm almost done, so.
I'm
almost done with it.
Oh,
so.
good. Well, whatever you say. In any event, you've got to appear next week and tell us what you have done or what you still want to do.
Okay.
Elsa, could you take over?
Okay. Well, my topic is completely different of what we have been doing for the last couple of weeks. Has nothing to do with any of the cognitive sciences or computers. Well, at least not directly. And so what I was focusing on is on capitalism or economics and how it relates to creativity. And I'm going to do this
Can you throw your voice more?
Okay. And the way that I'm gonna, well, what I've been doing so far is just research on the relations between these two.
Turn up the volume.
Okay. And so the way that I'm going to talk about creativity is by art, any form of art, whether it's commercial art, mass art, pop art, fine arts, or any other type of literary arts. Okay, so the conflict that I'm having now, that you can probably help me with when I'm done exposing what I have so far, is tying it back down to the initial aspect of creativity. So once you hear or comment on what I have to say, just please, or feel free to stop me even while I'm talking.
No, I'm okay. You don't want to be stopped until you've given the preliminary.
Okay.
Is that true?
All right.
Okay, so
No,
we'll wait.
Or you can comment in between. It doesn't matter.
All right.
Okay.
Go on.
All right. Okay. So first of all, basing the initial part of my project on Adam Smith's theory of economics, which he presented in The Wealth of Nations and Theory of Moral Sentiments. It was published in 1759. And so Smith is basically the father of this idea of capitalism.
Can you hear, Joe?
Okay.
Okay. So he views the individual as a foundation stone for political life, and he also views the individual as a foundation for economic life. And back when he was living, economic and political life were very much so intertwined, more than now. And okay, so in order to succeed, people were basically focused on their individual achievements and were trying to achieve individual richness or to better themselves.
Let me interrupt you now.
Uh-huh.
You have, this is a draft that you've developed.
Mm-hmm.
If you prefer, you can read it.
Okay.
Read it with feeling and delivery so that everyone can easily follow it. It isn't as if you have to paraphrase yourself.
Oh, okay.
Whatever you prefer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I mean, this is mostly just a history of Adam Smith and how he came up with this theory. So I don't think that is that important. I'm just trying to make the point of where this theory came about and how self-interest is the main, the key point. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory of value. So before Adam Smith, the political economic concept of labor was defined by reference to a feudal system in which all grades and classes of labor and all other forms of property were ultimately subject to a monarch, while the soul of the laborer was entrusted to the tender care and mercies of a church with a monopoly on revelation. The resulting case system also embraced a more ancient division of labor between the liberal and mechanical arts. That basically means that those who worked with their heads practiced liberal arts, and those who worked with their hands the mechanical. And it took until the 15th century, artists, engineers, humanists, and scientists, genius, Da Vinci, Dürer, Michelangelo, and they came to begin bridging this ancient chasm. An additional span was laid by their successors in the 16th and 17th centuries, where high artisans and instrument makers whose experimental method inspired Francis Bacon and fueled the scientific revolution. So,
let me interrupt. Ramon, are you picking this so that people can follow it?
Yes, I am.
You are slurring your words. Try to
okay.
articulate them more carefully.
I'm sorry. Okay, so the value of goods and services was rooted by Smith in the labor theory of value, where the theory of capital started, and as physical plants and equipment, where they learned how to measure labor content of a good as well as historically embodied labor and capital. Does anybody have any comments on organizing my thoughts? No? Okay, so basically that was just, the first part is just a recap on capitalism and its history. The second part is going to be cultural economics of arts funding, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about culture and art and culture and economy. Okay, so right now I'm going to concentrate on art and economy. Okay, I'm going to just read a little bit from here. Is that okay?
Okay.
All right. The first engine of mass production was not the steam engine, but rather the printing press, innovated in the 15th century. The spread of literary arts by this innovation revolutionized the world and set the stage for religious and political revolutions of the next 500 years, and for the technological transfer of knowledge between cultures, countries, and continents. At the very time, the arts for art's sake movement withdrew from mainstream industrial society in the 19th and 20th centuries. New communications media emerged, including steel engraving, plates, photographs, recordings, films, radio, television, and video recording, which permitted the commercialization of art through the exploitation of revenue streams implicit in copyright. This process has continued until today, where the arts have become a significant factor in the economy. From an economic perspective, there are three distinct segments of contemporary arts, namely the fine arts, the commercial arts, and the amateur arts, as well as four distinct disciplines: the literary, media, performing, and visual arts. In each creative source is the individual artist. The fine arts are a professional activity which serves art for art's sake, just as knowledge for knowledge's sake is a rationale for pure research in the science. The commercial arts are a profit-making activity which serves art for profit and generally places profit before excellence. The amateur arts are a recreational activity that serve to recreate the ability of a worker to do his or her job, or a leisure activity that serves to self-actualize a citizen's creative potential and thereby permits him or her to more fully appreciate life. All three arts, although are independent, they're also interrelated. The amateur artist, in actualizing his or her talents and abilities, provides an educated audience and initial training for the fine and commercial arts. The fine artist, in the pursuit of artistic excellence, as an end in and of itself, provides research and development for commercial arts. The commercial arts, in the pursuit for profit, provides the means to market and distribute the best of amateur and the fine arts to an audience large enough and in a form suited to earn profit. Collectively, these three types of artistic activity make up the arts industry, including advertising, broadcasting, motion pictures, performing, and visual arts, publishing, sound and video recording, compared to manufacturing industries. The Canadian arts industry in 1983 was the largest full-time employment for more than 234,280. The fifth largest with salaries and wages of $3.1 billion, and the 10th largest with revenue of $9.2 billion, or 2.5% of the gross national product. This is like
Elsa,
info in
let me
1986.
I think it would be more productive
Uh-huh.
if instead of going through the paper the way you have been, you could just talk off the top of your head in terms of what you're doing and what the paper does, and then we could possibly go back to the paper for more of this detailed writing that went into it. Is that possible?
See, that's what I was trying to do, but the problem is that I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to organize it yet. I'm not
That's
finished,
where we can
like,
help you.
far
No.
enough.
The idea is not to go through the draft, but to help you develop your thinking further. So can I make two suggestions?
Yeah, sure.
One, that you stand up and acts as if you were talking to a large audience and sort of project everything, but do it spontaneously without much thought in advance, which may be at first a little uncommon to you. You'll feel, oh, I'm not a public speaker. No, you are. And present the problems, present the issues, the problems, and why it is that you have this doubt about or uncertainty at the moment about how it's all going to turn out. That would be, I think, more exciting. Can you do that? Try at least.
Okay. You want me to stand up? I don't
Yeah,
want to stand up. Can I
or
just sit
why
in?
don't you go to the blackboard and use it as if you were teaching?
I'm not good. I don't. Okay. Okay, I'll try. Yeah, sure.
And you can't do anything wrong. Why did you get into this? You might. How about my getting you going with some questions?
Okay.
Why did you choose this rather than an infinite number of other possibilities?
Well, I went through a lot of possibilities.
People in the last back row have to hear you.
They can't hear me.
Of the virtual auditorium.
Okay. I went through a lot of different possibilities for writing my paper, and I didn't really feel comfortable with any of them. And then I don't know. One day I just suddenly figured that I might as well relate it to something that I'm currently doing.
Great. Okay, let's hear about that.
Okay, so I'm taking a managerial psychology class for my major, which is business and finance. And
But don't talk to me. Talk to the back audience.
Okay.
The back of the auditorium.
So in reading some of the articles and case studies, I came up with how managers in business try to influence the creative ability of the employees, especially in engineering environments. And they use different ways in order to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship. And that's how, back to the creative abilities of people in general, is a common theme. And in this class, I thought of relating it to business.
Okay.
And so far, I've been doing a lot of research on the topic, and I kind of put a little bit together. Most of it is just raw research, like I was reading right now. It's nothing that's polished or organized as it should be by the time I turn it in. But I've learned a lot about the history of economics and about art and how even since its beginning, it's been funded through commissions by the church or by kings, and then later in the Renaissance period it was funded by certain patrons like the Medici family, and how money has been a big factor in the production of art and all kinds of art, literary art, paintings, music, everything.
You start with Adam Smith, and you mentioned the two most important books of his, one on wealth and the other on sympathy, the sentiments, on moral sentiments. Now, the moral sentiments are feelings, and he is part of a school of ethics that existed in the 18th century that are very important because of a line of derivation of philosophers in ethics up to the present, but also because that line of derivation, and Smith in particular, is the point of view that Immanuel Kant criticizes. So that if you think of the history of philosophy as having been sort of revolutionized by Kant's work, and it's had a lasting influence for the last 200 years, you also have to consider Smith as the source of his rejection of an alternate view that belongs to what's called the moral sentiment theory of ethics. Can you say something about that in itself before getting on further?
Like what?
You do mention Smith, though, but not just because he's important in economic theory. Is there anything in his economic theory or his ethical theory that directly impinges upon creativity in employees as stimulated by the employer, which is what motivated you in the first place?
So far we have read.
So it's just a kind of introduction,
Yeah.
but it's not terribly relevant. So if you had left it out, nobody would know the difference, so it wouldn't make any difference.
Right. The problem with my paper right now mostly is structure, and it's also, I think, I need to find a more specific focus for the paper.
Well, that's what we're going to all be working with you right now. How would this be? First of all, have any of you studied the philosophical writings of Adam Smith or the economic writings? He, on the economic side, he's important as one of the founding fathers of the idea of capitalism, that people are motivated selfishly, and the justification for their selfishness is because through competition they actually contribute to benefits for everybody. So this is the unseen hand that government has set up so that while each person is through capital accumulation, through enterprise of a capitalist sort, selfishly trying to benefit himself and outdo other people, that effort contributes to a network of relationships that actually benefit everybody. Right? That's the fundamental idea in Western capitalism, and it goes back to a large extent to his philosophizing by Adam Smith in the middle of the 18th century. All right? We can come back to that in a minute. Second, in terms of the ethical theory, there's no preparation in that either. The moral sentiment theory says that we have codes of ethics which are rigid. There are laws, there are magistrates, and all of these are governed by some concept of reason. Kant was a great philosopher, tried to rehabilitate the importance of reason by showing how you could justify the foundations of ethics on purely rational grounds, and if there were mandates of a government, for instance, that couldn't be justified in that way, that was irrational, then it wouldn't really be ethical. Now, we don't have to get very far into Kant's ethical theory, but what I want to emphasize is relevance to what Elsa is interested in, what we've been working on in the moral sentiment theory represented by Adam Smith. Because the kind of sentiment that he emphasizes is sympathy. And out of sympathetic feelings towards other people, we then sort of work out a modus vivendi, a way of living. And out of that comes ethical rules. So if everybody was a sadist, let's say everybody was not only filled with selfish desires, but took pleasure in giving pain to other people, your own selfish desire for pleasure would lead you to hurt other people, that would undermine our conception of ethics, because ethics doesn't operate that way, but rather in terms of how people feel about what happens to other people. So that if somebody is suffering, you give him or give her a helping hand, and people say, "Oh, isn't that noble? Isn't that right? People who are bad off ought to be helped." Now, there's a variety of ways you could help. One is by changing the government so that people, for instance, who are starving, wouldn't starve anymore. But how do you do that? By stimulating industry and getting jobs for them, or putting them on the dole, or by having a kind of intermediary, which, like in the New Deal in this country, in which the government intervened to set up programs that would give jobs to more people and that would protect people who are old. So out of that comes Social Security, or sick and unable to cope with the costs of medicine, and that's Medicare. So that's a kind of state socialism, and obviously socialism would be one way of coping, and then there are extremes of socialism. Communism is not the same as socialism, and so on. And in general, the ethical desire to be of help would operate in different political conditions, but would be based upon feelings that people have about other people. And that's different from what, the thinking that we all have, that there's something right and wrong, this is discoverable by reason, and in the case of Kant, reason then gets to be analyzed in a very special, very powerful sort of way to combat the moral sentiment theory represented by somebody like Adam Smith, also by David Hume, utilitarianism, and different other ethical theories which are concerned about human feelings in a way that Kant thinks is external to ethics. It isn't that Kant isn't interested in feelings or happiness. His point is that that doesn't tell us much about ethics. To be ethical, you have to do what is right, and you have to do it because it's right, not because it helps other people or brings about happiness. At the same time, Kant says it's very noble to bring about happiness. There's nothing wrong with searching happiness for yourself. It's just that ethics is not based on that. The difference between right and wrong of an ethical sort has to be found by means that are independent of our search for happiness and are concerned about the happiness of other people. All right, the reason I thought Adam Smith could be of utility to you is that he's talking about human affect rather than cognition. And that's something we've talked about. And the question is, how is that relevant to creativity in the arts or creativity in business on part of employees, and how that might or may not lend itself to stimulation by employers, which is your thesis, you see? So it possibly depends on what you want to do. Going back to the content of Adam Smith's theories, you might find it more relevant to your project than you have indicated. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, well then, now we know where you began. Where do you go from there? And what are the problems you're facing?
Okay, so I'm having, well, most of the problems I'm having right now is tying all of the parts together.
Just talk to the camera, which is in the last row of the auditorium.
Okay, and well, I mean, the other stages of the paper is how like art has been influenced by business and by funding, and how that goes back to capitalism and but I just it seemed like a good idea when I was doing the research, but now I don't see how I'm gonna tie it together. So I don't know what to do. My paper's like not working.
Well, one way would be to study afresh what the theory of capitalism is. It doesn't exist just as a theory. It isn't just that you go to business school and you find that you can get a better job than you could if you didn't go to college and didn't go to graduate school in business. And then having landed that job, what you do is to answer the telephone and become qualified as a broker on the stock exchange, and then you buy and sell shares, and that may be your idea of what capitalism is. But the point is that kind of person is highly trained but not very highly educated, because the whole structure of that way of life is based upon ideas about human nature, what people are and what they should be, and how individuals can contribute to it. We're not slaves merely of our irrational desires to have 3 cars instead of 2, or to eat in restaurants instead of at home where it doesn't cost as much. We choose that. We choose to live that way. And we choose to be a broker or not. And the society is set up to justify that kind of choice or not, depending on the society, on the basis of very general ideas about what human beings are and should be doing. Now, starting with someone like Adam Smith, how does this tell us about what feelings are and what they should be in a capitalist environment of the sort that you're addressing?
Well, I don't know. Okay, before can I don't know.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, but I thought of a point that could be made. For example, in the reason I guess that art prospers in a capitalist society is because art is a luxury, and
okay,
that people will strive to obtain luxuries, therefore being able to sustain art. But I don't like this topic anymore. I don't want to. I don't want to write my paper on it.
Well, explore that more. What does everyone think that art is a luxury?
Well, it depends what type of art, I guess.
Well, tell us. What's the type that is considered a luxury, and by whom?
Well, for example, theater.
What?
Theater.
Okay, theater.
Like Broadway or whatever. That would be a luxury to attend one of those shows.
All right. Do you think it's a luxury? Or do you think everyone considers it a luxury?
Yeah.
Okay, let me become autobiographical. My college roommate decided that he wanted to go into theater. And he did. For him, it was not a luxury. It was a need, a necessity, a burning interest that he had. It was what he wanted to do. And he became successful. But the reason he became successful was that it was a passionate involvement. He really cared. and didn't worry about the money.
Right.
He eventually created his own company, and it was here in Boston. I think it was the last real major theater company in Boston, regional theater company. It finally couldn't go on because he couldn't get a good enough business manager, and that's not what he wanted to do. What he wanted to do was to make productions, theatrical productions, and he devoted his life to that. He's still does. He's never made much money, but he never cared about that. What he cared about was the art form as something that he needed, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. Mm-hmm. And that's true of many people.
Right, that's people who are the creators of that art, right? But I'm talking about people who are purchasing it.
Or what?
Like in a commercial
Consuming.
standpoint, consumers. I was referring to that, to the consumer side of art. But I mean, of course, people who create art do it because, you know, not merely because of the monetary rewards, but because of their passion to do it, or at least we'd hope.
Even if there aren't monetary rewards.
Right.
Okay. But, so what you mean is what's called the consumerist art.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be an example of that? What's an example of consumerist art that you're talking about?
I
mentioned commissions of paintings or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, well, that was...
Well, there's a great phenomenon in our age which is often condemned as being so largely, not entirely, but largely consumerist. It's called television.
Yeah, well, I mean, currently, like, the mass media, which is a form of art, like television and movie productions and music. Some music. I'm talking about commercial music and commercial television and commercial movies.
Okay.
Not like, for example, independent films, which don't make a lot of money, but are of higher quality than mass-produced films.
Okay, now that is worthy of analysis in terms of what you mean by higher quality, what makes one thing higher quality,
right.
and what, how did you characterize the consumerist art? I guess.
Well, in that case, the consumers would be the big producing firms that like pay huge bucks for big name actors to come in and fly it all
where do
around.
they get the big bucks? Why?
That's the thing. They're just expecting that because they're putting it on the large market, that a lot of people will want to come see it for those big names. So they'll make back all the money they're putting in. Whereas smaller budget may have more creativity, but
No, but what I'm saying is where do you get this large market? Why
by
is
just
it?
being able to publicize and because they have so much money at their disposal, they're able to put so many more commercials, run such an advertising campaign for like a year or something ahead of time, and then everyone's all hyped up about it.
No, I'm sure that's true, and it's relevant to Ilsa's point. But what motivates all these people to give the money to the in responding to the ads?
To the individual.
Yeah,
Why is it that there are some productions that have lost fortunes, and others that made a great deal of money on very small investment? Mm-hmm. There's something in the motivation of the audience, that's what I'm groping for.
There's got to be a mix between the advertising and then actually having a product that is creative and good.
No,
and it's easier.
Is it creative?
No,
Is that
it
the
doesn't
truth?
necessarily have to be creative. It just has to appeal to a certain type of audience, and that's basically what they're hoping on. When the investors take the risk to put in their money to make a certain film, they're hoping that the audience will react to that film in a positive manner, so that they will. The investor takes that risk in hopes that the audience will pay a lot of money to see that movie.
No,
More money back than they
no,
had.
Right.
what you and Tyler are saying
But
is true, I think.
I know, but like what you're talking about is what motivates someone to go see that film.
That's
Like
right.
how is art characterized as good or as bad, or
Okay.
what is higher quality or lower
Right,
quality of
tell
art?
me.
Well, I don't know. As that just depends on each person and their set of values and their
Well,
narrative.
In earlier years, it used to be said that all Hollywood movies, not all, but most Hollywood movies, were made for 12-year-olds. And maybe now the age has gone down because there's so much more animation and so much greater effect on action films that even little kids respond to, naturally. It's a question of whether the movie is made in accordance with the taste of a large audience that has enough money to buy the product. And that will vary from society to society and time to time. But the consumerist art would always be geared to what is thought to be the mentality of a possible audience, of a large scope, a large scale, right? Whereas the quality seems to imply that there are certain standards that somebody at least knows, and that's to be examined, which defies that kind of quantitative standard. All right? Okay. Now, how does this fit into your general problem? Let's say we've clarified things to that extent.
Okay.
Is this related to Adam Smith in some way? To the idea of Western capitalism?
Well, yeah, it is, because in the end it ties back to the idea of self-interest by the part of the people who are creating that mass art to sell, and it is in their self-interest that they are creating this production, but at the same time, the way that the invisible hand works, I guess, they are also creating jobs and stimulating the economy in a certain way.
And what is the creativity that goes into this?
The creativity that goes into it, well, if we're talking about art, I mean, art is by nature creative. So, I guess.
Well, the consumerist art may not be very creative. It might be very derivative from what everybody does, except that it has a way of promoting itself better. The creativity comes in the advertising.
Well, that too, plus
the art of advertising.
The actors are in a sense creative in the way that they might portray the characters. Maybe not really creative, but somewhat. And also, I mean, I think just the idea and the innovations that they put into the work, and also just the market that they're creating is creative in the way that they look for new ways to make money.
I think Ryan can say.
I think there's even clearer of a driving force, I mean, for greed, if you look at like technological innovation, the creativity that goes into that. Because you see like almost every major war creates like all these new technologies, and it's all based on self-interest and greed by some party that caused the war. And I think that's a much clearer analogy than the art, because there's always some people who want to do art for the sake of art because they like being creative, and it's not necessarily driven by money. So that's pretty clear.
Let's start from a different angle. Let's say that you're a Hollywood mogul. You're the head of a studio. And what you tell the world is, we want to make the best possible movies. We are interested not just in money, we're interested in high quality We want to make works of art, right? But we also want to make profits for our investors and for our, incidentally, themselves. Let's say there's a film that comes, a possible movie that is being considered, and you say to one of these great moguls, look, this is not a movie that will make much money because there isn't a large audience that's interested in this, but the studio ought to make it out of devotion to artistic standards, moral standards, political standards, God knows what, that bring about a quality picture rather than a base and vulgar movie, right? What's the mogul going to say? Well, we would like to not be base, we want to do quality, but we also want to make a lot of money, so how is it to be adjudicated? Well, one way of adjudicating it is to say, this is a democratic country. Nobody has the right to force anything of that sort upon the general public. You know, it isn't as if we're in Nazi Germany, a good example of a non-democratic country, though not the only example. And the government, the people running the country, because they have got the power and military control, have decided that certain things should be seen and other things should not be seen. All right? We're not like that. What we have to do, therefore, instead of imposing upon the public something it doesn't want, we've got to do is to respond to what the public has indicated it wants. And its response is by buying tickets going to the box office. So that the fundamental principle in our decision-making should be, is this what people want, or is it not what they want? We have to be passive in that respect. We can't force culture upon anybody. All right? Now, this has all sorts of ramifications in American society and different democracies. Does that throw light on this question of creativity? The creativity won't be in the quality of the work, necessarily. It'll be in finding out or just having a creative way of discovering what people want and then creatively giving them what they want. Or what do you think about that?
Right, that makes sense.
Is that what would be the creativity that would go into finding out and giving? And is that the right approach? Are there different kinds of creativity, some of which are better than others? And how do we determine what's better than another in terms of creativity? You don't have to be quick on your feet and come up with ready answers, but,
No, I'm thinking about it.
But take all the time you
Yeah.
want. Think about it. Ponder it. And the rest of you too.
Okay, well, I mean, the way that I think, I mean, they come up with what a general population would like is through different marketing techniques or just market studies, which involve either surveys or the success of past works, and just I don't really know if that's creative in itself. I don't see how that would tie into creativity.
I mean, it
So-
could be considered creative once you understand what your target market is, and to try to think of what would appeal to that
Right.
audience, and then to create ads that would appeal to them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the creativity comes in. But the actual market research itself is not that creative, but it's what
Well,
you
of
do with
course.
the information.
You have to have like interesting clips to show when you like, if we're talking about a movie, when you're advertising for that, you put out like a trailer which has like selected parts from the movie. And it's not always like in the same order, like chronologically that happens. So there's a creative process that goes into making the trailer.
Yeah, that could be where, like, since you seem kind of confused about where the creative aspect comes in, I think that's the main area.
What I'm trying to ferret out is where in all this creativity lies, where in all this the nature of human feelings come in. These are big problems that are relevant not only to the philosophical issues about feeling in relation to cognition and the mind and the body, but also political ones and even religious ones. For instance, why is it, do you think, that American culture is so greatly hated by so many people around the world? For instance, Islamic people. There are over 1 billion believers in Islam, Muslims, and a large percent of them really hate America for reasons that are relevant to what we're just now talking about.
If we're getting into the religion discussion, I had an interesting idea earlier. When you're talking about commissions of works of arts, I was like, well, that's not necessarily true earlier, because it was like often religiously based, like a lot of the artwork, like paintings and stuff that they did, or
Right, and I was talking about artwork in general. Like, for example, certain kings in countries like England and Austria commissioned musicians to play for them in the court, or so
Or
that's
like-
not
yeah.
right. And like not only, I mean, I was generalizing in all forms of art, and like the commissions did come like partially from the church, partially from the state, and sometimes both when like the church and the state were like together.
or when the state was just trying to please the church.
Right.
And the church itself was a large group of money, since
No, yeah, definitely.
But the church is a good example, because the church throughout Western civilization has arrogated to itself a kind of authority about the difference between right and wrong, about truth and falsity, about higher and lower values, about ultimate truth. And whenever it got much power, it did exactly what the Taliban did, only up to date with the latest technology, so to speak. In Afghanistan, it ruled out many things that people do seem to want in general and get in the West. And the reason those things were ruled out, showing of suggestive or sexual material on television or in the movies, dancing of a sort that somehow seemed to be inappropriate for human relationships, a discussion on possibly subtle approval of relationships between people that the Taliban and the ruling clerics considered to be evil or sinful. And the hatred for America comes out of the feeling that everything, in America you can do whatever you want. There's no concern about right or wrong, because if you get enough people who want something that is sinful or an evil, then it'll come into existence, because money is the only thing that makes the ultimate decision. And that also leads to consumerism in the sense of being dependent on the idiosyncratic tastes of a large enough number of people. So it'd be, on that view, it's a little like trying to decide what to have for dinner by the fact that the little children, the babies in the family, like sweet things, and they like to eat desserts all the time. They like to stuff themselves with food that isn't good for them, but the adults know better, and so they can't allow the children. And the view of the clerics would be we're the equivalent of the adults, and in America, the children run everything because they're only gratifying their own personal taste. Now, where's creativity going to come into all of this?
It seems like creativity might almost be...
Sir?
Creativity might come in where you described it as, you described the tastes of the public as idiosyncratic. It might be that the creative person is the one who deciphers almost our taste to make it appear less arbitrary. Or it appears arbitrary what we want to consume, but the creative person in this business, whatever business, will be the one to see a pattern somehow and exploit that for profit.
I think that...
I mean, to see what's all in all our heads that we don't know. We don't explicitly tell them what kind of movie we want to see. We just know it when we see it.
The secret of success is sometimes said to be being a little ahead of the times. In fact, Panasonic used to have a slogan to that extent. Nick, you're nodding.
Yeah.
What was it?
I don't remember exactly the motto, but I remember using Panasonic using that slogan.
A little ahead of the times, right?
Something.
I remember the first time I saw that was about 35 years ago in England, actually, where there were big bulletin boards promoting whatever product at that time Panasonic was producing. And I remember thinking, if you're too far ahead of the times, then people are not going to be able to understand what you're doing. If you're not ahead of the times, then you won't be able to survive competitively because everybody else, it will be obvious to everybody else what to do and everyone will be able to do it. If you're a little ahead of your times, then you can do something that will benefit people in the present and yet give them something new that they'll spend their money for, and that will protect you against the competitors who are also limited in their imagination, right? Creativity then comes in being a little ahead of the mentality of the marketplace, not too much because then you won't understand that mentality, and not too slow because you then either won't be able to satisfy it or they won't realize that you're worthy of their money. So that becomes the criterion of creativity, or an evidence of creativity. Now let's say you had a different kind of society, like in the Taliban. The Taliban would be so far ahead of the population that it would have to coerce them to do what the Taliban considered to be good for them. And the motivation would, the justification would be, it's what we all do for children. Nobody lets children eat anything they want. They have to be trained and educated to do the right thing personally and in relation to others. So that,
and there are other groups in the world that think that they can teach the values better. So, of course, the U.S. swoops in like we did, and replaces their government and has another, dictator in there, another set of rules that are trying to.
The problem
teach
for
the good
creativity
children.
then is to know how to be sufficiently adjustable to the new circumstances so that you aren't seen as just an invader and an occupier, but somebody who understands the depths of their minds. And that's very hard, and that's very challenging, and that's, I think, the reason why America's having so much trouble in the Middle East now, because it's something for which the policymakers were never prepared.
Mhm.
Let's go back to Elsa.
Okay, I don't know.
I think it was a good idea for the paper.
All right.
It seemed like a good idea at first. I don't know. I have to work with it a lot more before I can have a final
Well,
product.
the purpose of this class is not to destroy your creativity and prevent you from writing anything that you had in mind. But in the pages that you were reading from, where does it go? And what are the later pages? What do they do?
It's mostly just talking about fine arts and how and their funding and the effects on different economies in America and global economies
In terms of what?
of numbers.
Of what?
It's just numbers, statistics, and it's not it's not really. I wasn't planning on including it in my paper exactly the way it is now. It's just stuff that I used for research to know more about the subject. But
Well,
it doesn't seem like I could incorporate it into anything.
Well, no. This is what you are interested in, and your major is in management. So one question would be, what would creative investment be like? What would be creativeness in the starting of capitalist ventures be like?
Right. Well, that's originally where I got the idea from, because I don't. Well, for example, the entrepreneurs, their job is basically to seek an idea, something that seems useful, practical enough, and that will sell, and that innovation and creativity is a big part in it. Because although sometimes and a lot of the times the ideas that surge are practical and might seem logical enough, it's a good idea that no one really materialized before. Other times, like for example, the new wave of innovation and of venture capitalism is biotechnology, and just investments in that is really big right now. But I mean that would be scientific approaches. Not to say that science isn't creative, because it is, but I don't know. I didn't really want to get a lot into that.
Okay, let me try another entry. This is only supposed to stimulate your imagination to use in any way you want. It's not anything that I'm giving us a solution to the problems or formulation of the problems. About 4 years ago, MIT School of Humanities got the idea of a new interdisciplinary program, which eventually turned into the program in comparative media studies. Aren't you familiar with that? Aren't you? It's even a major now, I think, right? And a minor, and there are graduate students. And I was one of the enthusiastic supporters of that, because it seemed to me interdisciplinary approaches to the humanities were very important. And my own work overlaps a lot. And now I'm giving half of my 2 courses, half of my teaching in philosophy of film, so I'm involved. The reason I mention it now is because it was thought that having a 3 or 4 day symposium at the very outset, before anything had been done, would get things going. It would help with fundraising. It would help with clarifying ideas about what to do with the program as a graduate program, an undergraduate program. And that took place. And at the symposium, people gave talks and lectures from different points of view. Some of them were entrepreneurs. They were heads of corporations who deal with subjects that seemed as if they might be overlapping with the kind of thing that would be done in the CMS program. And as a matter of fact, some donations have come out of that, and that's affected funding of projects that graduate students do and filters down into supporting the whole program. More than one of those speakers said, you know, we get lots of people from great universities applying for jobs with us, and they're highly trained as technicians, but they haven't read any great literature, they're not aware of the arts. In general, they're not what you would call a humanist, right? And that's the kind of person we want to recruit, not only for what you started out with, because we're employers who want creativity to develop in our employees, but rather because we don't know, and these people we do hire because they're technicians don't know how to be creative. Our hopes are that people in a place like MIT, where the technical skill is unmatchable, there'll be people who also have acquired enough training in the humanities so that they can come in with new ideas, good ideas, bright ideas, habits of self-criticism, criticism of one another, and in general, modes of creativity that we wouldn't have otherwise. Now, that seemed to me like a very good argument, and it fits in with my ideas about the humanities, that the humanities is interested in the nature of creativity. You can be very creative as a technician, as a scientist, you know, great as mathematicians, great new creations that have come out in those fields. But the field doesn't define itself in terms of the nature of creativity. It doesn't define itself in terms of the play of imagination, the way the arts do. It doesn't seek whatever the aesthetic truth, whatever that is. You've read my chapter on that, but rather scientific truth, which presupposes some objective knowledge about a world out there, or if it's psychology in us, rather than the bringing into being something new, which is creative and which reveals values, feelings, the attitudes that make human beings different from machines. That's what we want to have in people we hire, that kind of mix between, you know, absolute mastery of the techniques and some immersion in this. Now, and that seemed to me very telling, and that was the reason why these people in business were interested in this possible program at MIT. Now, the trouble with that is, in a sense, we know what it is to be creative in science. We may not know how to bring it about. You know, Einstein said, no, not Einstein, Edison said that genius in science is, or maybe not Edison, but because you will have heard it from other sources, 99% No, 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Others had said creativity means learning how to affix the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. What needs to be known is, what is that 1% of inspiration? What does that mean? Where does that come from? How do we get that? How do you learn how to sit still while you're being created? How is that going to, the affixing of the two? Because you affix your seat of your pants to the seat of the chair and fall asleep and not do anything. So there are these big problems. And in general, it's very hard to know how the arts are creative. How do you get a person in the arts to be creative? You can imagine how to get people in science. You get brilliant people who come up with very interesting scientific ideas and can impart them to the young, and the young sort of emulate them. But there again, emulate them, they don't imitate them because then it's not going to be original. But you can go a long way towards advancing before you have to wonder, am I really being creative? Whereas in art, it's right at the beginning, at the basis of it. It's, in a sense, the principal notion in art, the nature of imagination, the nature of creativity. All right. Now, how is, these people came out of business, how is this helpful for what you want to do in your paper? Or if it's not helpful, throw it away.
I'm not sure anymore because I don't know where I'm going.
If you were a businessman trying to recruit people and were impressed because they came from MIT and were part of a program like CMS or distinguished themselves in courses in the humanities, would you be fooling yourself? Is that what you need? Or what you need is an oddball like Bill Gates, who dropped out of Harvard when he was, a junior or a sophomore or a freshman? I can't remember. And went ahead and creatively made himself the richest man in the world, and creatively, made products that warranted his wealth. How does one go about that? What would be the correct procedure to get into your firm just the kind of person that you want, whom you will call creative? Do you have any ideas about that?
Well, that's kind of hard to tell, because that's kind of hard to tell. How can you tell whether someone is going to be creative or not?
But there must be research you can do, looking at
depending on their experience, for example,
teaching of creativity in business, something like that.
Right. Well, insofar as the research that I've seen, like the case studies that I've seen, one of the major ways that companies stimulate their employees to be creative is, for example, in certain companies they have looser policies on work and their employees, and they stimulate certain amounts of conflict to have discussion arise and have them try to come up with new ideas.
How much conflict?
No. Very a certain, only enough to start up a discussion. Okay. But not levels of conflict where there's tension or
what are other
anxiety
methods for stimulating creativity?
Well, they're what?
I said LSD.
I guess that would be a way to stimulate
the best rock and roll music in the world.
I don't know what kind of industry you're in, but yeah, but that could work.
But I think there is research of that sort that's been done by psychologists in particular about different ways of stimulating greater creativity on the part of, in business. You know, it would be different from art,
Yeah.
and there may not be any one way of doing it, but I think you could do some research along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like it'll work.
There is another way of getting into this, and that is in terms of Freudian theories about repression and sublimation. You're all familiar with Freud's general lexicon of psychological forces as he sees them.
Yeah, I don't like it.
No, I don't. No, I don't either. But there's a relevance that you'll see in a minute. He has the idea of repression and the idea of sublimation. It's based on the general belief that the life force, which comes out of Schopenhauer, is what he calls libido. And the clearest evidence of libido is the sex drive, right? Now, in society, it's often hard to allow that to get free because it can be destructive, Freud's view is, destructive of the social order. So repression is a way of bottling up the libido. Think of it as a kind of fluid in a receptacle, and it's dynamic, it's outgoing, right? Looking, let's say, for a member of the opposite sex, which is programmed by reproductive needs so that the species can continue. We're a dimorphic species, so the males and females who have to gather for the sake of the next generation have to be motivated to go act that way. That's the libido as a force, as a fluid force. But it can be dangerous, right? And so society puts it into a kind of closed receptacle and represses it in various ways. Incest is taboo. Sex with minors is taboo. All kinds of things are taboo, or just devoting your life to that is taboo. You have to do other things as well. All of those are repressive elements that society imposes upon the biological force, which eventuates in perpetuation of the species. But there is also the phenomenon of sublimation, and that is that in order for the fluid, this highly volatile, powerful, dynamic fluid, not to explode when there's too much repression, right? In other words, for the individual to go insane or to become violent, to become criminal, there has to be some outlet. And that's as if there are little pinholes in the receptacle that allows the fluid to escape randomly. One never knows just how, but you might try to control it. So you allow movies that have sex in it as a mode of sublimation, then how much sex, what kind of sex, and in the 30s there was censorship that eliminated more obvious examples of sex, but in many respects lots of those 30s movies that passed the censor are really very sexy. So this is all subject to social adjudication. That's stimulation. The reason I'm going through all of this, which some of you probably know, is because some psychologists said there should be a way of testing these generalizations empirically, the way psychologists do. Now, a consequence of the Freudian pattern of thought is that people who are creative will be more repressed than people who are not creative. Why? Because everyone is going to want to sublimate his or her repressed feelings. The creative people sublimate more than other people. If they didn't, they would go directly for that sexual object, because that's the nature of repression. Or programmed, to want to engage in active sexual performance so that a fraction of the time the species will be perpetuated, but nature doesn't care about this waste, as we notice in many other species. But that's still what we're programmed to do, according to Freud. If, however, you also have sublimation, then the people who are repressing this natural urge will use that. And those are the artists. Art is a kind of sublimation of what everybody wants overtly. All right, so that's the general conclusion of Freud. He has a couple of articles in Aesthetics, one of which says, how can we explain aesthetic creativity or talent? Well, he says nobody can. It's a great mystery, but we can give the psychological conditions, and that is that everybody wants to express directly his or her libidinal feelings. Some people, however, when they're given an opportunity, as people are in America in high school, let's say, where there's a lot of sudden explosion of hormonal drive and more opportunities than could have existed previously, some people somehow aren't adept at that. So that's the oddball in high school. There are boyfriends and girlfriends, and they go to dances. They have one way or another to deal with their sexual feelings, but some people aren't good at that. So they're the nerds or oddballs. If, however, by a quirk, one of them has an ability to create something that means a great deal to all the others, then those others will pay money for that and treat that person as a great celebrity. And so what he couldn't get, and Freud talks always from the point of view of the male, women will throw themselves at his feet, right? And so what he couldn't get directly, through his sublimations, the works of art, he will get indirectly. And what is it that he wanted? And Freud said it's what everybody wants. And the words Freud uses are money, power, and the love of women. All right? You can alter that for women. They want things like that, but not necessarily the love of women. And so through his art, the creativity in his art, he attains what he couldn't have attained it directly. Now, over and above that, Freud says, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not an esthetician, I can't define the nature of talent or aesthetic genius, but these are the psychological laws that are prevalent for the sake of that kind of outcome. Works of art done perhaps by a genius, people with talent. All right, now to get back to the psychologists, what they said is there must be a way of testing it. If we study a population of artists on Freudian grounds, we should find that there's a greater frequency of repression than there is in the general population, because when there's repression, either you go insane or else your sublimations take the pressure off of you, and the main sublimation is the creation of art. So artists should be people who are more oppressed but are able to sublimate in order to bring about their works of art. And the rest of the population, they're not repressed as much, okay? And so they're not artists. Now, the findings have varied, but I think in these experiments, what they found that Freud was wrong, that the artists, the people who were creative, were less repressed. That's the stock Victorian image of the artist, the painter in his studio who sleeps with all his models. He's such a libidinous creature, he can't control himself with models who are there to be painted, and whom he does paint, but he also has a greater appetite, which he doesn't repress, together with the feelings that he then puts into sublimations in his art. So there's something bizarre about that Freudian way of seeing things. Now, doing some research about that might help you to understand where creativity comes from and how it might or might not be relevant to business. Again, this is something for you to think whether you want to bother with in your paper.
Okay.
Anybody want to say anything else?
Can we have a break?
Along those lines? Joe?
What I have to say is, I need a break.
You need what?
A break.
Okay.
Nice.
Let's take a break.
That goes for you too, Ramon.
You're breaking us, Renoir?
Right now.
Okay, Elsa has a couple of further new ideas that she may use to change the direction of her paper, or to have a different kind of paper. So why don't we start with that?
Okay, so thinking that a way that I could just come up with a better paper that is more relevant to the topic is by focusing on a more specific type of art.
All right. Only louder. Go ahead.
Like, for example, film. I don't know. I'm just blurting out random ideas right now because I'm just not,
Well, no,
not sure.
random is all right. Just feel free to throw anything out. Doesn't matter if it's random.
Okay. Also, just completely throw out the idea of business and focus on the psychology of creativity
Fine.
based on different experimental research that has been done. So that would be another option that I'm considering right now.
Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
No, that's pretty much it.
Does anybody have any suggestions in the research that you've been doing that could be of help to Elsa? Okay, I think Tyler had some ideas he wanted to try out in this.
Sure. Again, my topic is going to be creativity in the art form of a cappella, and I'm trying out the idea of a thesis that that the development and the evolution of the art form is very similar to the evolution of rock and roll, both in recording and with respect to recording and live performance. The way they've gone around and toured, and but they're limited because the groups now aren't really the big one, or most noticeable ones aren't really professional. It's become like a collegiate collegiate art form, which is kind of limiting its development. But do you want me to get into the structure?
Well, the professional ones are the a cappella ones? Or the rock ones?
Of the rock, like, collegiate groups are developing in much the same way as rock and roll groups did, like starting just very simple, just like laying all the tracks down together, like sitting in a room around one microphone.
Right.
And it's become a lot more technologically developed, as well as the arranging is very much more complex.
But you said they're professional, as if
there are professional a cappella groups, but the ones that are primarily, I'd say, more on the cutting, like trying out more different and new stuff, and there are a whole lot more of these groups. Are the collegiate groups are the ones that are really pushing the envelope in terms of evolution.
But rock and roll turned into an enormous industry.
Oh yeah.
That hasn't yet happened to a cappella.
No, but it's blowing. I'm going to cite. There's a CD which is like a compilation CD, Best of Collegiate Acapella, that it's the best seller of all acapella music, and it's really been. It started in '95, and it's been selling. I have to look up the number on that.
So, for my clarification, I know the King singers, they're a cappella, but they're professional, aren't they? Or did they originate?
That was in the original.
King's,
Actually, it came
King's
from
college chambers.
A lot of the original stuff was more like chamber kind of quartet music, so it also stemmed off of more of a classical background. But then it kind of took a swing towards imitating rock and roll, and that's when it's been developing more with like kind of imitating the sounds of the actual instruments. Like the King Singers are more of a chamber group, if I'm correct.
And then there's the Swingle Singers. You know them?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
I think what they did originally was to make sort of swing variations or versions of classical music. But then they branched out and have different literature of their own, which isn't entirely based, even in a swing form, on classical music.
Well, and I think that's
they're a cappella, but I think they're not collegiate age. That maybe they started out in college, but I think they've gone beyond that.
Yeah, I did some research into the history of a cappella, and it did start out like mostly as quartets, like chamber groups, but like the collegiate groups that are sprung up like in the last, say, 10 years is when it's really been a huge like explosion of groups just going everywhere. Like, I don't know if you know, but we have 7 groups on campus, MIT campus, which is a pretty huge number considering there's like at least 15 people in each group, and you know, we only have like 4,000 undergraduates here, so that's a fairly large number.
There used to be something called barbershop quartets for men that who sang a cappella. Did that have any influence?
That did have a fair amount of influence just on acceptance of a cappella. I mean, that was dated way back even further into like jazz and blues. Like they were getting into really funky chords with that. And that's what caught a lot of people's ears earlier on, when it wasn't like nowadays what catches people's ears is like imitation of instruments, and like actual, like we're kind of following more toward the rock side of things. And actually, we even do like we try to do hip hop and other styles of music.
There's one Johnny Cash number that I know, maybe there are more, which is a cappella of 5 men, Cash plus 4 others. You know?
I'm not familiar. I have the essential Johnny Cash, which we listen to quite a bit this term.
Well, the words, let's see if I can remember the words. Daddy sang bass,
Mama sang
Mama
tenor.
sang tenor.
Me and
Right?
Little Johnny would join right.
Is that what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I know the
What,
song.
what is the name of it, title of it?
In the
first line?
sky, Lord, and it's like Daddy sang bass, Mom sang tenor,
That's
me and
right.
Little Johnny would join riding in the sky, Lord, in the sky. Yeah, I know.
That's right. So there it's sort of based on spirituals rather than rock music.
Yeah, yeah. That, which is more in. I mean, that was what I think popular demand called for at the time. But now people want more effects and want more like bang, bang, like. So it was more like laid back and like spiritual and kind of folksy, right?
Yeah.
That's what Johnny Cash was very much a folk singer. But he also developed. I don't know if you know this, but he covered a Nine Inch Nails song on his last album, which is pretty incredible because Nine Inch Nails is like this, hard rocking band.
Oh, what is 9 Inch? I didn't.
Nine Inch Nails is a band kind of 90s, and I don't know if they've done that much lately. They're kind of a harder rock band.
Well,
The
rest
song
of
he
you
covered
know.
was Hurts.
okay, where does creativity or
Oh, the creativity. I was just
mind and brain?
mind and brain come into this in my actual talk about the recordings and the methods that we've gone to, because now we get our creativity by recording each part individually and then touching each one up to be like almost perfect, which is, some would say it's like almost cheating because it's not like the pure art form, but others would say it's better that way because it allows the arranger to really bring forth what they had in mind and like show people their vision of this song and how it can be replicated with voices. And then of course you have a live performance, which is a strict, only voices, or should be only voices if it's true a cappella. And then you have your own chance to show how you can actually imitate the instruments that were originally used to do the song.
What you said, the different parts are stitched together later.
Mm-hmm.
What are the parts, the different voices, the individual singers?
It varies. We actually have a lot of different tracks. We don't just have like bass buried and then tenors. We sometimes have upwards of like 8 to 10 parts that each person that are sung throughout the group. So each person actually goes in and just sings what they would sing through the whole song with a track, like a MIDI track, a MIDI track playing behind them, just to kind of keep them all in the same beat
So it
and
is-
in the same key.
And then these different
And then you
voices.
process each of those tracks and make sure that all of the pitches are right and make sure it is in the right timing. And you can add effects and like there's a lot that you can
It's
do.
like a synthesizer. It's a synthesizing of
Of
different
sorts.
individual voices.
Yeah, and you can produce whatever sound you want because the voice is so versatile. So, and we can even do percussion that way. Like we produce a whole percussion track just with like little noises that someone can do. So there's a lot of creativity in.
What about the
Yeah.
nature of creativity? How does it
I don't really try to approach that.
Well, go on.
I think that would be something that would need its own. Well, the nature of creativity comes more like in a live performance, I guess, when you're really being creative for the sake of the audience that is right there. You actually have a connection between the two, and you try to establish that, and then creativity is showing the audience what you can do, as well as showing them how much fun you're having doing it, or how much you enjoy it, or
How much
how
of
deeply
that
it moves
is
you.
improvisational?
There has to be a pretty even split between preparation and inspiration, because
No, improvisation.
improvisation. I'm sorry. Between preparation and improvisation, because you have to know. We have to have a basic guideline for how you want to proceed in a performance, and you have to have rehearsed the song a lot of times so that all of the groups, all the people in the group fit together and blend and just kind of work toward a common goal of creating the song. Where was I going? But you also have to improvise, because if you do the exact same thing every time, it's going to get stale. And the audience doesn't like just sitting there and watching you stand there with a blank face and kind of not looking around. You have to be like engaged and moving, and when you're really doing that and really feeling the song, you will do something a little different every time.
But what if your little difference is going to throw off the others who also have their little difference?
Well, you have to think about the others, and that's why you work as a group, and that's why you rehearse a lot. And you know what works, and you know where you can change little things. And especially if you're a soloist, you have a lot more freedom to change whatever you want.
But you're not a soloist. It's a cappella group sing.
Well, actually, we have soloists because
come out of it, but
yeah.
No, but I was thinking when there are other people involved, then this could throw them off. Do you know the Indian music of Ravi Shankar, for instance? Ryan is shaking his head.
One of my friends, Indian. One of my friends actually from back home does that.
One of your friends is what?
He does the Indian. He sings, and it's completely improvisational, and they have to like play off the different intonations in their voice.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and Ravi Shankar is one of the great classic Indian sitar players, isn't it? Isn't the sitar his instrument? Is that did I get the name right?
Yeah, we're like quarter steps.
And what I remember is him having a kind of relationship with the drummer, which is little drums, I forget what they're called, and they are always looking at each other and sort of responding to each other through the music. It's a little like jazz, only it's not it's not an individual doing whatever comes into his head, though maybe that doesn't exist in jazz either, but always responding directly to what this other performer does, so that the creativity consists in the improvisation. And that's something that some of you may want to pursue. What is the nature of improvisation, and how does that contribute to creativity or not? I have some pages on that in the new film book, 3 Philosophical Filmmakers, because Hitchcock was dead set against it. Well, I guess I haven't gone too far afield yet, so let me go into Hitchcock. Hitchcock's idea was that before he got to the set, he would write out the script, he would have a storyboard, very minutely, picture after picture after picture, and the actors were expected simply to carry out his plan. No improvisation at all. In fact, Hitchcock said on more than one occasion, being on the set is the most boring part of making a movie. What I like is working on it beforehand. And he didn't tolerate any kind of changes that the actors would make. No improvisation. He mentions about actors that what he expects of an actor is for them to do as they're told, to simply carry out the intentions of the directors, and he's horrified when occasionally he's been saddled with, for a variety of reasons, with one of the method actors. Method acting is a method that was developed in New York City by the Actors Studio, and it consists mainly in expressing your feelings in a creative way, depending on what those feelings are in that scene, what your feelings are about the characters in the scene, So it was a way for actors to become more authentic by, instead of just reciting lines in a rote fashion, expressing their own feelings in relation to what the feelings of the characters would be, right? And Hitchcock gives an example, a movie of his called I Confess. Do any of you know that? It takes place in Montreal, and it's about a priest who is accused of a crime and complicated reasons you don't have to go into. He's not guilty, but he's found guilty. And as he's walking out of the court, a mob sets upon him, and Hitchcock wanted him to, let me say, I think maybe he's already been found not guilty, but the mob, or hasn't been, I guess he's a free man, so it's toward the end, I guess, when he's found to be not guilty. I forget the details of the plot. In any event, Hitchcock said, what I wanted to do was to go from the courthouse to the Hotel Frontenac in Montreal, famous landmark, and I wanted to get the audience to see that it was a hotel to simplify the structure of the film. So what I did was I placed a number of spectators on the first floor above a sign saying hotel. It would be on the facade, hotel, and above the facade there would be spectators. And I said to the actor, when you get to this point, coming out of the courthouse, look up at the sign, or look up at the actors, and look up at the spectators, and the audience then will see the sign, right? You get his device that he had planned carefully in advance. The actor was Montgomery Clift, who was a Hollywood star, and who had been trained in the method, the New York method, New York Actors Studios conception of the method. And Clift said to Hitchcock, I don't think I would. In other words, as the character, why would he look up? And Hitchcock, very annoyed with him, and told him, you know, do what you want, you know. And in commenting on this, he said, actors don't realize that directors and cinematographers have all sorts of problems that they're not equipped to understand. So all I want from an actor is they'll do what he's supposed to, instead of improvise that way, because he would or would not look up at that moment. Now, as a matter of fact,
perhaps this guy had put more thought into the character and into the character development at that point. So
that was what I suggested, that if Hitchcock had been a little more open-minded, he could easily have contrived things so that this way of acting that Clift had would be accommodated with Hitchcock's own technical planning as a director for those people whom he had on the first floor above the sign. Instead of they're looking, they're just silent spectators while the crowd is haranguing the priest. They could start shouting over the crowd, and so the priest would naturally look up at who's shouting from that location too. And then the audience would see the sign, and then they could get into the next phase that Hitchcock had in mind. So this was the deficiency on Hitchcock's part. The reason I mention it is because Hitchcock was against improvisations. There's only one movie in which he says that he did any, and that was in The Birds. I don't know if you know The Birds. Mm-hmm. There's a scene in which the birds come into the living room through the chimney. The family are huddled in fright because the birds are being violent outside, and they're imprisoned even. in the house, and in the living room there is a fireplace. And at one point, all of a sudden, they're shocked because little birds, a whole flock of them, come rushing down the chimney and into the room. Well, anyhow, that's part of the movie. And Hitchcock was unsatisfied. There was something that wasn't working right. And so he did improvise then, or he told the actors to improvise. And it ended up better, he said, because of that. All right, in general, he was against improvisation. Renoir believed in improvisation because he thought that the role of the director was not to tell people what to do, the way Hitchcock did, and Charlie Chaplin did too, but rather to create an artistic milieu in which the actors would put themselves into the position of the characters, and there's a long aesthetic about that which we don't have to go into, so that they would have what Renoir calls space to move about in. So they as real human beings dealing with characters that are supposed to be human beings, they would make gestures that come to them that nobody could predict, that nobody could tell them what to do. They could walk a certain way, they could look a certain way. If they introduced some words that Renoir hadn't thought about, that's fine, could be all right. They should improvise, within limits, of course, because he was the director and had ideas about the screenplay, but then he improvised a great deal with the screenplay too, so that improvisation was for him the heart of filmmaking. And the reason for that was what he was trying to do was to establish contact with other human beings, to create a conversation with the audience, and that doesn't happen if it's all pre-planned by the speaker and the audience are passively just taking it in. It happens if there is a kind of mood that's set up so that they're responding to the audience are responding to another person, the director and the actors who are also improvising. All right? Another example of this is a movie that you might know called Some Like It Hot. You don't know that?
Marilyn Monroe.
Pardon?
Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe.
I didn't hear what I said.
Said Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon. And the director was Billy Wilder. In one scene, Jack Lemmon, who is dressed in drag, has gone out with Joey Brown, who is a very famous comedian, who plays the part of a millionaire who picks up girls and marries 7 or 8 of them, one after the other. And the reason that Jack Lemmon does it is so that Tony Curtis can be on Joey Brown's yacht with Marilyn Monroe. All right, and then Tony Curtis, who also is in drag in that movie, but for the sake of making love to Marilyn Monroe, he's dressed as a man. He climbs in the window in the middle of the night to get back into their hotel room, and there's Jack Lemmon, a little out of his mind, having been dancing the tango all night long with a rose between his lips, acting like a woman with this lecherous old man. He's lying on the bed with maracas. Is that what it? I always forget.
Castanets.
What are they?
Castanets.
No, not castanets. Maracas. Yeah, with maracas in his hand and going out. And he says to Tony Curtis, I'm engaged. And Tony Curtis says, really? Who's the lucky girl? And Jack Lemmon says, I am, because Joey Brown has proposed to him. You get the idea. You get the situation. It's very, very funny. It's a wonderfully funny movie. It's a great movie. I think the best movie of its sort. It's in fact, it's been ranked that way. It's the best Hollywood comedy ever made. All right. The reason I bring this up is because in the rehearsals, Billy Wilder thought that Jack Lemmon was having trouble. This is a story that I heard Jack Lemmon give when he was meeting with students at Harvard, where I sneaked in, and he explained it because one of the students had said to him, "Which is harder to do, comedy or tragedy?" And Lemmon said, "Well, tragedy is easy; just recite the lines. Comedy is hard because on the movies, because on the stage, comedy works through a kind of improvisation to the response of the audience. You're always aware of the audience, and so slightly you change in accordance with what they're feeding back to you, right? But in the movies, there isn't any audience. There's just that camera, the cameraman, and maybe nobody else, the director, nobody else, very little. And you can't do comedy the way you would do on a stage. And that's why it's harder. And he then said everyone knows that famous scene, which I just described to you, him in bed with the maracas. And he didn't have the maracas originally, and didn't quite know how to deliver the lines. And so Billy Wilder said, "Look, get a couple of maracas and act as if you're on the stage, and use the maracas, sort of to convey what you're doing, as if it's part of your eliciting the response of the audience. Improvise." And he did, and it's one of the great scenes in all of Hollywood movie making, through the improvisation. That's the reason I wanted to bring this in. Wilder improvised, but not as much as Renoir. And then Orson Welles also improvised, but in different ways in between. He was the star because he was a great actor, and he wrote everything. But so it wasn't as fluid an improvisation as in Renoir. Now the question is, where does creativity come into this? The creativity you would think would be a function of improvisation.
Yeah, I think so. And the connection with the audience and understanding the feedback that you're receiving,
right?
And then giving back
into it. If it's a live performance.
If it's a live performance, that's right. Which is why I contrast recording versus live performance, because with the recording, it's like the movie. You have to have it be perfect, and in the case where you have the director's role is filled by the arranger/producer.
Right, but there are different kinds of creativity, for instance, in movies. I mentioned Charlie Chaplin. Chaplin, like Hitchcock, wanted no nonsense from the actors. Hitchcock said once, actors all actors are cattle. And people threw that up at him, and in his usual wonderful Hitchcockian way said, "Oh, I would never say that about my friends, the actors, that they are cattle. I would have been misquoted. What I might have said is that all actors should be treated like cattle." Right? Well, the point is, that was the attitude of Charlie Chaplin. And some of the actors that I've seen in documentaries on film said, Charlie would say, "Okay, you stand here, and what you do is this," and then he would have acted out. And he was such a great actor that we couldn't imagine doing anything better than that. So, and that's what he wanted. He just wanted them to imitate what he was doing. Now, his movies, everyone would say, are some of the most creative possible by means of his method, which was predicated upon his own creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, the actors had to smother theirs. And he had them so brainwashed that they thought they couldn't do better.
Well, that was probably because he was an actor-director, as opposed to just simply a director, looking at them from the perspective of having a goal. Like, he just wanted them to be like him, which is not a way to direct.
But there are different ways of being like him. Orson Welles various of his actors said, Orson would take you aside and you'd have these profound discussions about what you were supposed to do. He'd put his arm around you and it would be very warm and cozy, and he was a fellow actor and he really seemed to understand. And then he said, now go out and do it. And he himself said that he improvised a great deal on the set and wasn't opposed to actors improvising. That was it. That was fine. Not the equal of Renoir, but still improvising.
Mm.
Now, he himself says in an interview, when you're directing actors, you have to make love to them to get them, because that's what actors are like, and he knew because he was like that himself. And if they're stars, you really have to make love to them. You have to emphasize whatever it is that is involved in making love. He didn't mean it literally, obviously. He didn't mean you had to have sex with a leading lady, but you had to sort of make love to them, right? You get the idea. Now that is a different kind of improvisation from Renoir's improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
Renoir actually showed he was a very warm and loving person, and he really loved his actors when they were good, but it isn't that he made love to them. He just loved Jean Gabin, for instance. I don't know if you know him, a great famous box office star in the 30s and 40s, and he loved Anna Magnani, and it wasn't physical or sexual. It wasn't as if he was making love to them. I mean, seducing them or having physical relations, I guess. So that it would vary the way in which the improvisation would come out. And that may be true here too. Do you have a director for you? Somebody who, well then...
We have a musical director who directs during performances, and actually he was very involved in recording, especially for this last CD, and for the one before that.
Well, one thing you should plummet, and this has been a big digression, but not really, is how does the creativity come out? Does it come out in response to what the director tells you? Does it come out because of your rapport with the audience, or your feeling of creative oneness with the group? The feeling that you're all together creating something together. What?
Why do I have to say it's just one?
No. Well,
I believe that the
each
essence
of
is that
them
it's a
needs
mix,
some kind of analysis.
and that there's an emphasis on different parts of it in terms of which media you're performing in, live versus recorded. That's what I have. That's it.
That's all right. I mean, the point is that each of them would have its own little configuration to be analyzed.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Wells, it was complicated. How many of you know Citizen Kane? You must know some. Please say we see some movies. Well, you know the scene in which Jeb Leland comes in drunk and says he wants to leave.
At the paper?
What?
At the newspaper?
The newspaper, yeah. He wants to go to the Chicago newspaper. He wants Kane, his close buddy, to send him to Chicago. That's before the climax after the Leland's review of Susan Alexander. right? Remember all that? That's later. But to get to Chicago, he comes in drunk once, and I think it's after Kane has been defeated in the elections because of his affair.
Everything's still decorated.
Yeah, that's right. And Kane says, "What are you going to do on the Chicago staff?" And Leland says, and he's supposed to be drunk. He says, "I'm going to do how is it? Critical, critical." I don't know. He mixes up. He wants to say literary criticism, and the syllables come out wrong and misplaced in a nonsensical sort of way. But that's clear. That's what he's saying, and it's what a drunk man would say, right? Now the point is that wasn't in the script, and Wells in an interview says, as a matter of fact, Joe Cotton, had been drinking a little too much, and he came in tipsy for that scene. And it's not what he was supposed to say, but that's what came out, and it was so wonderful, I just left it in. And he said this happened all the time. We would do this kind of improvisation. Well, I don't know. I don't know.
There's a certain amount of criticism or a certain amount of creativity in that. There are groups that actually all take a shot together before.
But then they don't fall apart. Why is it
they're less nervous and look less hitched? Like if you're up on stage and you just look nervous, the audience isn't going to respond favorably. They're going to be like, they just look awkward. So some groups will just loosen up and just like as a tradition, we'll actually take a shot together.
Well, you have to.
I'm just throwing it out there just because you mentioned.
The point is, the director has to know how to prepare himself, and the group have to be close enough that they can quickly adjust to that.
Indeed.
Another example, there's a great musical comedy. Some people consider it the greatest musical comedies, unlike Some Like It Hot, which has music in it and Marilyn Monroe singing, but it's not a musical comedy. This one is called Love Me Tonight, with Jeanette MacDonald and Maurice Chevalier, made in 1929, I guess. No, 1932, I think it was. Very early. And in one scene, it is a dress party, mask dress party, right? What do you call it? Masquerade. And one of the characters has on the top of the helmet of armor with a visor that is pushed up, and when he wants to talk, right? All right. Another character is talking to him, and he pushes up his armor to talk, and it keeps falling down. And this was unrehearsed and not part of the idea. And the first one, the second one, reaches and holds up the visor at crucial moments and lets it drop, and it's a very funny effect, completely unrehearsed. Listening to all this, there is Myrna Loy. You've probably seen her in the mystery stories with William Powell. Let's call the Thin Man series. Myrna Loy, very beautiful woman who made many great movies, and she's also in Masquerade, and has a mantilla, Spanish fan, in front of it. But at the crucial, while this is all happening, she's laughing her head off, but because you can't see it behind the fan, it looks perfectly all right. Now, all of this was improvised, and the director could have cut it out or said stop, but he thought it was so good, it was working so wonderfully, he just let it go on. That takes a very talented and agile director, though he could always have cut it out, but he didn't want to stop it and he didn't want to cut it out. So there's a lot to be said. Now, where's the creativity in all of that? Maybe in Myrna Loy putting up her fan, or the other character reaching over and manipulating the visor. Now, so all of that is worth exploring in your paper. No? Anything else you want to say?
No, I think you've added a fair amount. I'll do a little bit of cross-media comparison. Probably not too much of that. I don't want to stick more in just...
Okay. Do you want to say anything else?
No. Anyone else want to share?
We have hardly any time left. Would anyone else like to talk about his paper now? Or her paper?
Sure.
Though you talked last time, didn't you? If not, let me leave you again with the idea that I started out with, and encourage you, while thinking about your own papers, to think a little about that bright idea that occurred to me about the brain being adaptive in a way that somehow nobody has figured out, how the brain can be adaptive, how it can evolve in a lifetime in response to experience, and how this interaction between the two might change the whole way in which we think of the mind-brain situation and the future possibilities of computers. Another way, I suppose, Rosalind Picard and the others working on making computers more responsive to human beings would be to say, how can we create a computer which, despite its mechanical and programmatic features, will resemble people more and adapt to them and their experience the way the human brain adapts to the experience of those who have that brain. Did you hear what I was saying? You came in a little late.
I came in late, but
had I already got beyond that?
What I was going to say is that I'm actually writing my paper about the need. Like, why do we want to create computers to be like humans? I want to address.
Well, have you looked into that book of hers called Affective Computing?
Not too much. Most of what I have has to do with, I guess, kind of springing off of where Minsky kind of left off, where I felt that he didn't address the need, of creating.
No, but you go to
technology.
the computer and look up
Rosalind Picard. Yeah.
Picard. There are quite a number of articles by her, and there's the book. And particularly if the articles were written after the book, that will supplement what's in the book, because probably the book incorporates the main ideas of the articles. But that's exactly what you just now were talking about. Did you hear what I was saying at the beginning? No, okay. You missed that. Well, then I'm glad I thought of repeating it, because that's what I was hoping we might talk about next time, together with your papers.
Well, it's going to happen.
Okay? So, and remember, I'm available 24 hours a day, because the internet never sleeps. And not too long after I get a message from you, I don't think I'm going to be in New Hampshire this weekend, so I'll be accessible to the email all the time. I'll be happy to respond and see if I can be of any help to you. Don't feel any obligation, but if I can be of help, I really want to be. Right? So I'll see you all on Tuesday.